Audio test. Whoa, how about that? I see movement on my screen, so it's registering something. Did it just start? Okay. I don't know why that changed. Now you hear me. Okay. No echo or anything? Um, because I did kind of adjust some stuff here. No echo. Okay, cool. So I've just been muted this whole time. Whoops. Oh well. I don't think anybody was listening anyways. It's tricky because Farmos usually just doesn't have the audio turned on, so she doesn't tell me what if she doesn't get that kind of problem. She's got the non-digital transmission. Well, happy Wednesday. How you doing? How are the Sharkies? You got a big old stack of books I saw. That's pretty nice. I've got half of that stack behind me in there, or at least some of, and then the other half is over on bookshelves. uh, sorry. I don't know. I don't know why that changed. The audio setting changed on my end. I don't know. Maybe there was an update or something, and stuff got moved around. Actually, finding the stack of books was probably the most exciting thing to happen to you in weeks. Ah, boy. Pandemic life. Am I right? Did you find it in a used bookshop? Apparently, Queen of Sorcery is out of print. Huh. Tricky. Like, that's kind of sad to hear. Hmm. Well, better take extra good care of our copies then. Speaking of Queen of Sorcery, so back in the usual place, usual setup, stable internet connection, all that. I'm trying to. I was thinking about because I've normally when I do these, I I'm recording this as I do it live, and then later I'll upload it on YouTube because some people, you know, want to catch up and things like that, or not do watch live, and so some people check them out on there instead. And so I've got the recording from last time where we read like half of a chapter. I don't know if it's going to be very good because we were kind of stopping and starting the whole time. I don't imagine it would be very fun to listen to. So I'm wondering if we should just restart this chapter. So we were only like 7 pages in. What do you think? Should I start at the beginning or should I? You found all of the Malorian in Value Village. To find the rest, you went to 4 other thrift stores and 3 used bookstores. Wow, that's quite the hunt. Well, good job. Good job tracking them down. Yeah. So, what do you think? Should I start at the beginning or should I just upload what I've got from last time and start where we left off? Became your raison d'etre. Just one of those like, I have to do it. I have to find them. The hunt is on. Mister, I thought you didn't like raisins. Womp womp. Ain't no bad joke like a dad joke. I'm quite thirsty. I might need to refill my drink at some point. I'm a bit tired today. Should be on a t-shirt, but then again the shirt would be just the worst dad joke. We got Formosa's dad socks that say ain't no bad joke like a dad joke on them for Christmas a year or two ago. Something like that. Yeah. So, what does everybody think? Should I try and pick up roughly where we left off, or should I just restart chapter 1? Jock soaks? Jock soaks. That's what I said. I said jock soaks. Joke socks. Oh. Oh, that's not a promising start. Jock soaks. Just getting it out of the way now. I hope so. Restart? Okay. In that case, I think I'm just going to get into it. It's already 7:15. A little bit of technical difficulties at the beginning there. Let's just get right into it. So once more, Arendia. Ooh, there. That's a good focus. Look at that. And I believe where this chapter starts right is right up here where it says Vo Wasoon. I think I'll get a refocus most likely. Right there. That's where we are in Arendia right now. I know that because the first two words of chapter 1 are Vo Wasoon. Although the following three are less promising. Alright, chapter 1. Vo Wasoon was no more. 24 centuries had passed since the Wasite Eddings had been laid waste, and the dark, endless forests of northern Arendia had reclaimed the ruins. Broken walls had toppled and been swallowed up in the moss and wet brown bracken of the forest floor, and only the shattered stumps of the once proud towers mouldered among the trees and fog to mark the place where Vo Wasoon had stood. Sodden snow blanketed the mist-shrouded ruins, and trickles of water ran down the faces of ancient stones, like tears. Garion wandered alone down the tree-choked avenues of the dead city. Y'all ready for some teen angst? His stout gray wool cloak drawn tight against the chill, and his thoughts as mournful as the weeping stones around him. There it is. Faldor's farm, with its green, sun-drenched fields, was so far behind him that it seemed lost in a kind of receding haze, and he was desperately homesick. No matter how hard he tried to hold on to them, details kept escaping him. The rich smells of Aunt Pole's kitchen were only a faint memory. The ring of Dernick's hammer in the smithy faded like the dying echo of the last note of a bell. and the sharp, clear faces of his playmates wavered in his remembrance of them until he could no longer be sure that he would even recognize them. His childhood was slipping away, and try though he might, he could not hold on to it. It is, I don't know, I'm making fun of the teen angst, but it is kind of a sad thing when you realize that you can't remember something very clearly that was, at one time important to you. That's definitely I can understand feeling melancholic about that kind of thing. I think that's a relatable feeling. But I mean, then again, he's still like 14 or 15 here, so. Everything was changing. That was the whole problem. The core of his life, the rock upon which his childhood had been built, had always been Aunt Pole. In the simple world of Faldor's farm, she had been Mistress Pole, the cook. But in the world beyond Faldor's gate, she was Polgara the sorceress, who had watched the passage of 4 millennia with a purpose beyond mortal comprehension. Although you were saying that your edition didn't say 4 millennia, your edition says, did you say 3 or 5? 3, right? They made her younger? I mean, 4 millennia versus 3 millennia, if that's the case, but it's younger is relative, I guess. Watched the passage of 4 millennia with a purpose beyond mortal comprehension. Oh, Sharky say the library compilation of the 3 books said 3, but this one says 4. That's so weird. That's such a strange thing to change. I wonder which one is like. I wonder if it is because of the publication of the release of the book Polgara the Sorceress. I wonder if that was changed to match something in that book, if it was retconned. But that's pretty weird. Excuse me. And Mr. Wolf, the old vagabond storyteller, had also changed. Garion knew now that this old friend was in fact his great-great-grandfather, with an infinite number of additional greats added on for good measure. But behind that roguish old face, there had always been the steady gaze of Belgarath the sorcerer, who had watched and waited as he had looked upon the folly of men and gods for 7,000 years. Garion sighed and trudged on through the fog. Their very names were unsettling. Garion had never wanted to believe in sorcery or magic or witchcraft. Such things were unnatural, and they violated his notion of solid, sensible reality. But too many things had happened to allow him to hold on to his comfortable skepticism any longer. In a single, shattering instant, the last vestiges of his doubt had been swept away. As he had watched with stunned disbelief, Aunt Pole had erased the milky stains from the eyes of Markia the Witch with a gesture and a single word, restoring the madwoman's sight and removing her power to see into the future with a brutal even-handedness. It's interesting because it says, it was with a gesture and a single word. But when it happened, we didn't actually hear Aunt Pole say anything. She gestured and it happened. So I guess she probably said it quietly. And then as Mr. Wolf explained afterwards, you really don't even need the gesture. You just need the word to focus your will. But I guess that's a habit of Aunt Pole's. Your current copy was published in 1989. The compilation definitely was newer. All right. Garion shuddered at the memory of Markia's despairing wail. That cry somehow marked the point at which the world had become less solid, less sensible, and infinitely less safe. Uprooted from the only place he had ever known, unsure of the identities of the two people closest to him, and with his whole conception of the difference between the possible and the impossible destroyed, Garion found himself committed to a strange pilgrimage. He had no idea what they were doing in this shattered city, swallowed up in trees, and not the faintest idea where they would go when they left. The only certainty that remained to him was the single grim thought to which he now clung. Somewhere in the world there was a man who had crept through the pre-dawn darkness to a small house in a forgotten village and had murdered Garion's parents. If it took him the rest of his life, Garion was going to find that man, and when he found him, he was going to kill him. There was something strangely comforting in that one solid fact. He carefully climbed over the rubble of a house that had fallen outward into the street and continued his gloomy exploration of the ruined city. Sharky say, if Martia was the point when his innocence of the world was shattered, what did he think of the dangers they experienced before that? Well, I think Martia's... It says that cry marked the point at which the world had become less solid, less sensible, and less safe. I think because that's the point where he could no longer deny that his Aunt Pole was a sorceress, could actually do real, tangible magic. It was not necessarily a safe world before that, but this is the point. Like, I think the key bit there is the world had become less solid and less sensible because of the magic. Because before that there had been magic, but you know, things that maybe could be explained away through social reasoning, you know, like hypnosis or whatever, you know, they could all just be coincidences and sleight of hand and whatever. But that was something that you couldn't fake. Yeah. What Farmos says. Sharky say maybe it means a lot more dangerous things could be possible than the tangible world he knew before. That too. Continued his gloomy exploration of the ruined city. There was really nothing to see. The patient centuries had erased nearly all of what the war had left behind, and slushy snow and thick fog hid even those last remaining traces. Garion sighed again and began to retrace his steps towards the moldering stump of the tower where they had all spent the previous night. As he approached, he saw Mr. Wolf and Aunt Pole standing together some distance from the ruined tower, talking quietly. The old man's rust-colored hood was turned up, and Aunt Pole's blue cloak was drawn about her. There was a look of timeless regret on her face as she looked out at the foggy ruins. Her long, dark hair spilled down her back, and the single white lock at her brow seemed paler than the snow at her feet. "There he is now," Mr. Wolf said to her as Garion approached them. She nodded and looked gravely at Garion. "Where have you been?" she asked. "No place," Garion replied. "I was thinking, that's all." "I see you've managed to soak your feet." Garion lifted one of his sodden brown boots and looked down at the muddy slush clinging to it. "The snow's wetter than I thought," he apologized. "Does wearing that thing really make you feel better?" Mr. Wolf asked, pointing at the sword Garion always wore now. "Everybody keeps saying how dangerous Erendia is," Garion explained. "Besides, I need to get used to it." He shifted the creaking new leather sword belt around until the wire-bound hilt was not so obvious. The sword had been an Aristide present from Barak, one of several gifts he had received when the holiday had passed while they were at sea. "It doesn't really suit you, you know," the old man told him, somewhat disapprovingly. Sharky say perhaps, too, the fact that he saw someone he respected and trusted could be capable of inflicting pain and distress on someone almost mercilessly. Yeah, it's interesting how healing Martier's vision was, it came across as something so cold-blooded, right? Like, giving someone their eyesight back was a bad thing. But, you know, we understand why that is. "Leave him alone, Father," Aunt Pole said almost absently. "It's his, after all, and he can wear it if he likes." "Shouldn't Hetar be here by now?" Garion asked, wanting to change the subject. "He may have run into deep snow in the mountains of Sendaria," Wolf replied. "He'll be here. Hetar's very dependable." "I don't see why we just didn't buy horses in Kamar." "They wouldn't have been as good," Mr. Wolf answered, scratching at his short white beard. "We've got a long way to go, and I don't want to have to worry about a horse foundering under me somewhere along the way. It's a lot better to take a little time now than to lose more time later on." Actually, it says more time later. I added the on. Garion reached back and rubbed at his neck where the chain of the curiously carved silver amulet Wolf and Aunt Pole had given him for Aristide had chafed his skin. "Don't worry at it, dear," Aunt Pole told him. "I wish you'd let me wear it outside my clothes," he complained. "Nobody can see it under my tunic." "It has to be next to your skin." "It's not very comfortable. It looks nice enough, I suppose, but sometimes it seems cold, and other times it's hot, and once in a while it seems to be awfully heavy. The chain keeps rubbing at my neck. I guess I'm not used to ornaments." "It's not entirely an ornament, dear," she told him. "You'll get used to it in time." Wolf laughed. "Maybe it will make you feel better to know that it took your aunt 10 years to get used to hers. I was forever telling her to put it back on." "I don't know that we need to go into that just now, Father," Aunt Pole answered coolly. "Do you have one too?" Garion asked the old man, suddenly curious about it. "Of course." "Does it mean something that we all wear them?" "It's a family custom, Garion," Aunt Pole told him in a tone that ended the discussion. The fog eddied around them as a chill, damp breeze briefly swirled through the ruins. Garion sighed. "I wish Hetar would get here. I'd like to get away from this place. It's like a graveyard." "It wasn't always this way," Aunt Pole said, very quietly. "What was it like?" "I was happy here. The walls were high, and the towers soared. We all thought it would last forever." She pointed toward a rank patch of winter-browned brambles creeping over the broken stones. "Over there was a flower-filled garden where ladies in pale yellow dresses used to sit while young men sang to them from beyond the garden wall. The voices of the young men were very sweet, and the ladies would sigh and throw bright red roses over the wall to them. And down that avenue was a marble-paved square where the old men met to talk of forgotten wars and long-gone companions. Beyond that there was a house with a terrace where I used to sit with friends in the evening to watch the stars come out, while a boy brought up chilled fruit, and the nightingales sang as if their hearts were breaking." Her voice drifted off into silence. "But then the Asturians came," she went on, and there was a different note then. You'd be surprised at how little time it takes to tear down something that took 1,000 years to build.
Don't worry at it, Paul, Wolf told her. These things happen from time to time. There's not a great deal we can do about it.
I could have done something, Father, she replied, looking off into the ruins. But you wouldn't let me, remember?
Do we have to go over that again, Paul? Wolf asked in a pained voice. You have to learn to accept your losses. The Wassite errands were doomed anyway. At best, you'd have only been able to stall off the inevitable for a few months. We're not who we are and what we are in order to get mixed up in things that don't have any meaning.
So you said before. She looked around at the filmy trees marching away in the fog down the empty streets. I didn't think the trees would come back so fast, she said with a strange little catch in her voice. I thought they might have waited a little longer.
It's been almost 25 centuries, Paul.
Really? It seems like only last year.
Don't brood about it. It'll only make you melancholy. Why don't we go inside? The fog's beginning to make us all a bit moody.
Unaccountably, Aunt Pole put her arm about Garion's shoulder as they turned toward the tower. Her fragrance and the sense of her closeness brought a lump to his throat. The distance that had grown between them in the past few months seemed to vanish at her touch. The chamber in the base of the tower had been built of such massive stones that neither the passage of centuries nor the silent, probing tendrils of tree roots had been able to dislodge them. Great, shallow arches supported the low stone ceiling, making the room seem almost like a cave. At the end of the room, opposite the narrow doorway, was a wide crack between two of the rough-hewn blocks provided a natural chimney. Dernick had soberly considered the crack the previous evening when they had arrived, cold and wet, and then had quickly constructed a crude but efficient fireplace out of rubble. It will serve, the smith had said. Not very elegant, perhaps, but good enough for a few days. As Wolf, Garion, and Aunt Pole entered the low, cave-like chamber, a good fire crackled in the fireplace, casting looming shadows among the low arches and radiating a welcome warmth. Dernick, in his brown leather tunic, was stacking firewood along the wall. Barak, huge, red-bearded, and mail-shirted, was polishing his sword. Silk, in an unbleached linen shirt and black leather vest, lounged idly on one of the packs, toying with a pair of dice.
Any sign of Hatar yet?
Barak asked, looking up.
It's a day or so early,
Mr. Wolf replied, going to the fireplace to warm himself. Why don't you change your boots, Garion? Aunt Pole suggested, hanging her blue cloak on one of the pegs Dernick had hammered into a crack in the wall. Garion lifted his pack down from another peg and began rummaging through it. Your stockings, too, she added. I love that not only has Dernick set up a fireplace, but he's also hammered pegs into the wall so that they can hang up their things. Dernick's very practical. Should you say, like in one of those coming-of-age stories where a gruff father takes his son hunting for the first time? Farmos says Dernick's a professional. Is the fog lifting at all? Silk asked Mr. Wolf.
Not a chance.
If I can persuade you all to move out from in front of the fire, I'll see about supper, Aunt Pole told them, suddenly very businesslike. She began setting out a ham, a few dozen loaves of dark peasant bread, a sack of dried peas, and a dozen or so leathery-looking carrots, humming softly to herself as she always did when she was cooking. The next morning, after breakfast, Garion pulled on a fleece-lined overvest, belted on his sword, and went back out into the fog-muffled ruins to watch for Hatar. It was a task to which he had appointed himself, and he was grateful that none of his friends had seen fit to tell him that it wasn't really necessary. Ham song. As he trudged through the slush-covered streets toward the broken west gate of the city, he made a conscious effort to avoid the melancholy brooding that had blackened the previous day. Since there was absolutely nothing he could do about his circumstances, chewing on them would only leave a sour taste in his mouth. Unlike ham. He was not exactly cheerful when he reached the low piece of wall by the west gate, but he was not precisely gloomy either. Parmo says, "Teen angst? No, wait, no. I'll try not to, Garion." The wall offered some protection, but the damp chill still crept through his clothes, and his feet were already cold. He shivered and settled down to wait. There was no point in trying to see any distance in the fog, so he concentrated on listening. His ears began to sort out the sounds in the forest beyond the wall, the drip of water from the trees, the occasional sodden thump of snow sliding from the limbs, and the tapping of a woodpecker working on a dead snag several hundred yards away. Alright, y'all ready to get that teen angst worked up again? "That's my cow," a voice said suddenly from somewhere off in the fog. Garion froze and stood silently, listening. "Keep her in your own pasture, then," another voice replied shortly. "Is that you, Lammer?" The first voice asked. "Right. You're Detton, aren't you?" "I didn't recognize you. How long's it been?" 4 or 5 years, I suppose," Lammer judged. "How are things going in your village?" Detton asked. "We're hungry. The taxes took all our food." "Ours too. We've been eating boiled tree roots." "We haven't tried that yet. We are eating our shoes." "How's your wife?" Detton asked politely. "She died last year," Lammer answered in a flat, unemotional voice. "My lord took our son for a soldier, and he was killed in a battle somewhere. They poured boiling pitch on him. After that, my wife stopped eating. It didn't take her long to die." "I'm sorry," Detton sympathized. "She was very beautiful." "They're both better off," Lammer declared. "They aren't cold or hungry anymore. Which kind of tree roots have you been eating?" "Birch is the best," Detton told him. "Spruce has too much pitch, and oak's too tough. You boil some grass with the roots to give them a bit of flavor." "I'll have to try it." "I've got to get back," Detton said. "My lord's got me clearing trees, and he'll have me flogged if I stay away too long." "Maybe I'll see you again sometime." "If we both live." "Goodbye, Detton." "Goodbye, Lammer." The two voices drifted away. Garion stood quite still for a long time after they were gone, his mind numb with shock and with tears of sympathy standing in his eyes. The worst part of it was the matter-of-fact way in which the two had accepted it all. A terrible anger began to burn in his throat. He wanted suddenly to hit somebody. Then there was another sound off in the fog. Somewhere in the forest nearby, someone was singing. The voice was a light, clear tenor, and Garion could hear it quite plainly as it drew closer. The song was filled with ancient wrongs, and the refrain was a call to battle. Irrationally, Garion's anger focused on the unknown singer. His vapid bawling about abstract injustices seemed somehow obscene in the face of the quiet despair of Lammer and Detton. Without thinking, Garion drew his sword and crouched slightly behind the shattered wall. Sharky say, I guess Garion, living on a good farm with the sorceress feeding everyone, never even knew what real poverty and hunger was like. Yeah, and I think, in general, it's maybe less common in Sandaria. We'll learn a little bit more about Arendish culture as this book goes on. I was just thinking, if this were a Tolkien novel, I would have had a page or two of lyrics to sing here. I don't miss that. Farmo says, fewer lords sending people off to war, more farmsteads. Sandaria is all about farming, it seems. The song came yet nearer, and Garion could hear the step of a horse's hooves in the wet snow. Carefully he poked his head out from behind the wall as the singer appeared out of the fog no more than 20 paces away. It was a young man, dressed in yellow hose and a bright red jerkin. His fur-lined cloak was tossed back, and he had a long curved bow slung over one shoulder, and a well-sheathed sword at his opposite hip. His reddish gold hair fell smoothly down his back from beneath a pointed cap with a feather rising from it. Although his song was grim, and he sang it in a voice throbbing with passion, there was about his youthful face a kind of friendly openness that no amount of scowling could erase. Garion glared at this empty-headed young nobleman, quite certain that the singing fool had never made a meal out of tree roots or mourned the passing of a wife who had starved herself to death out of grief. I like how it says that as though Garion has done those things and been through that. Yeah, and the Sharky say, neither of you, Garion. The stranger turned his horse and, still singing, rode directly toward the broken arch of the gateway beside which Garion lurked in ambush. Garion was not normally a belligerent boy, and under other circumstances, he might have approached the situation differently. The gaudy young stranger, however, had presented himself at precisely the wrong time. Garion's quickly devised plan had the advantage of simplicity. Since there was nothing to complicate it, it worked admirably, up to a point. No sooner had the lyric young man passed through the gate than Garion stepped from his hiding place, grasped the back of the rider's cloak, and yanked him bodily out of the saddle. With a startled outcry and a wet splat, the stranger landed unceremoniously on his back in the slush at Garion's feet. The second part of Garion's plan, however, fell completely apart. And I think this is where we stopped reading the last time we tried this chapter. Even as he moved in to take the fallen rider prisoner at sword point, the young man rolled, came to his feet, and drew his own sword, seemingly all in one motion. His eyes were snapping with anger, and his sword weaved threateningly. This could actually be a pretty bad situation for Garion. He's never been in a proper sword fight before, not holding his own sword. Garion was not a fencer, but his reflexes were good, and the chores he had performed at Faldor's farm had hardened his muscles. Despite the anger which had moved him to attack in the first place, he had no real desire to hurt this young man. His opponent seemed to be holding his sword lightly, almost negligently, and Garion thought that a smart blow on the blade might very well knock it out of his hand. He swung quickly, but the blade flicked out of the path of his heavy swipe and clashed with a steely ring down on his own sword. Garion jumped back and made another clumsy swing. The swords rang again. Then the air was filled with clash and scrape and bell-like rattle as the two of them banged and parried and feinted with their blades. It took Garion only a moment to realize that his opponent was much better at this than he was, but that the young man had ignored several opportunities to strike at him. In spite of himself, he began to grin in the excitement of their noisy contest. The stranger's answering grin was open, even friendly. Sharky say, updated version. Garion wasn't normally confrontational, but he knew he could start a solid argument online in reply to that inflammatory post. Okay, good night, everyone. I'm kidding, I'm kidding, I'm kidding. I don't like that. I don't like that, Sharkies. Farmo says the puppy is now looking up like I finished. Sharky say misses too soon. Alright. Excuse me. The stranger's answering grin was open, even friendly.
All right, that's enough of that.
It was Mr. Wolf. The old man was striding toward them, with Barak and Silk close on his heels.
Just exactly what do you two think you're doing?
Garion's opponent, after one startled glance, lowered his sword. Belgarath, he began.
Leldoran,
Wolf's tone was scathing.
Have you lost what little sense you had to begin with?
Several things clicked into place in Garion's mind simultaneously as Wolf turned on him coldly.
Well, Garion, would you like to explain this?
Garion instantly decided to try guile. Grandfather, he said, stressing the word and giving the younger stranger a quick warning look. You didn't think we were really fighting, did you? Leldoran here was just showing me how you block somebody's sword when he attacks. That's all.
Really?
Wolf replied skeptically. Of course, Garion said, all innocence now. Sharky's picture Garion batting his eyelashes this whole excuse. What possible reason could there be for us to be trying to hurt each other? Wow, Garion. What possible reason could it be that you're just a jerk? Leldoran opened his mouth to speak, but Garion deliberately stepped on his foot. Leldoran's really very good, he rushed on, putting his hand in a friendly fashion on the young man's shoulder. He taught me a lot in just a few minutes. Let it stand. Silk's fingers flickered at him in the minute gestures of the Drasnian secret language. Always keep a lie simple. The lad is an apt pupil, Belgarath, Leldoran said lamely, finally understanding. I'm going to have to nail down that voice. I'm not certain quite yet. Farmo says, Oh no, Grandpa, we're just playing. Bat bat.
He's agile, if nothing else, Mr. Wolf replied dryly. What's the idea behind all the frippery? He indicated Leldoran's gaudy clothes. You look like a maypole.
The Mimbrates had started detaining honest Asturians for questioning, the young errand explained. And I had to pass several of their strongholds. I thought that if I dressed like one of their toadies, I wouldn't be bothered.
Maybe you've got better sense than I thought,
Wolf conceded grudgingly. He turned to Silk and Barak.
This is Leldoran, son of the Baron of Wildantor. He'll be joining us.
Farmo says, "Oh dear, you never want anyone to say you look like a maypole." The Sharkies reply, "Maybe I do." "I wanted to talk to you about that, Belgarath," Leldoran put in quickly. "My father commanded me to come here, and I can't disobey him, but I'm pledged in a matter of extremest urgency."
Every young nobleman in Asturias pledged in at least 2 or 3 such matters of urgency, Wolf replied. I'm sorry, Leldoran, but the matter we're involved in is much too important to be postponed while you go out to ambush a couple of Mimbrate tax collectors.
Aunt Pole approached them out of the fog then, with Dernick striding protectively at her side. "What are they doing with the swords, father?" she demanded, her eyes flashing.
Playing, Mr. Wolf replied shortly. Or so they say. This is Leldoran. I think I've mentioned him to you.
Aunt Pole looked Leldoran up and down with one raised eyebrow. "A very colorful young man."
The clothes are a disguise, Wolf explained. He's not as frivolous as all that. Not quite, anyway. He's the best bowman in Asturia.
I don't know why that was difficult.
And we might need his skill before we're done with all this.
"I see," she said, somewhat unconvinced. Sharkies keep hearing Leldoran. I'll try to enunciate more. Leldoran. Leldoran. Farmer says like Lil Gideon. Oh no.
Alright. There's another reason, of course, Wolf continued. But I don't think we need to get into that just now, do we?
"Are you still worried about that passage, father?" she asked with exasperation. "The Mrin Codex is very obscure, and none of the other versions say anything at all about the people it mentions. It could be pure allegory, you know."
I've seen a few too many allegories turn out to be plain fact to start gambling at this point. Why don't we all go back to the tower? He suggested. It's a bit cold and wet out here for lengthy debates on textual variations.
Garion glanced at Silk, baffled by this exchange, but the little man returned his look with blank incomprehension. "Will you help me catch my horse, Garion?" Leldoran asked politely, sheathing his sword. "Of course," Garion replied, also putting away his weapon. "I think he went that way." Leldoran picked up his bow, and the two of them followed the horse's tracks off into the ruins. "I'm sorry I pulled you off your horse," Garion apologized when they were out of sight of the others. There you have it, he apologized. "No matter," Leldoran laughed easily. "I should have been paying more attention." He looked quizzically at Garion. Why did you lie to Belgarath? It wasn't exactly a lie, Garion replied. We weren't really trying to hurt each other, and sometimes it takes hours trying to explain something like that. Leldorin laughed again, an infectious sort of laugh. In spite of himself, Garion could not help joining in. Both laughing, they continued together down an overgrown street between the low mounds of slush-covered rubble. And that's the end of chapter 1. Went through it a little quicker, and it's not quite 8 o'clock yet. Let's see, chapter 2 goes from page 22 on my copy to page 32. It's only 10 more pages. I think we keep going. Chapter 2. Leldorin of Wildantor, L-E-L-L, Leldorin. Being very clear, right? Leldorin of Wildantor was 18 years old, although his ingenuous nature made him seem boyish. So he should be older than Garion, unless Garion's had a lot of birthdays we've missed. No, Leldorin. Garion's 16? When did Garion become 16? Last I heard, Garion was 14. Did I miss something? Over here. Leldorin of Wildantor. I don't think Garion is 16. I am pretty sure Garion is between 14 and 15 years old. So I'm back here. There we go. No. Alright. Well, maybe we'll find out how old Garion currently is sometime soon. Leldorin of Wildantor was 18 years old, although his ingenuous nature made him seem more boyish. No emotion touched him that did not instantly register in his expression, and sincerity shone in his face like a beacon. He was impulsive, extravagant in his declarations, and probably, Garion reluctantly concluded, not overly bright. It was impossible not to like him, however. The following morning, when Garion pulled on his cloak to go out and continue his watch for Hatar, Leldorin immediately joined him. The young errand had changed out of his garish clothing and now wore brown hose, a green tunic, and a dark brown wool cape. He carried his bow and wore a quiver of arrows at his belt. As they walked through the snow toward the broken west wall, he amused himself by loosing arrows at targets only half visible ahead of him. Parma says that she has that problem sometimes, emotions too loud on her face. You're awfully good, Garion said admiringly after one particularly fine shot. I'm an Asturian, Leldorin replied modestly. We've been bowmen for thousands of years. My father had the limbs of this bow cut on the day I was born, and I could draw it by the time I was 8. I imagine you hunt a great deal, Garion said, thinking of the dense forest all around them and the tracks of game he had seen in the snow. It's our most common pastime. Leldorin stopped to pull the arrow he had just shot from a tree trunk. My father prides himself on the fact that beef or mutton are never served at his table. I went hunting once in Cherrick. Deer? Leldoran asked. No, wild boars. We didn't use bows, though. The Chereks hunt with spears. The Sharkies say, but what about ham? And Farmo says, I mean, of course, ham. Only wild ham. Only hunted ham. Spears? How can you get close enough to kill anything with a spear? Garion laughed a bit ruefully, remembering his bruised ribs and aching head. Getting close isn't the problem. It's getting away after you've speared him that's the difficult part. Leldoran didn't seem to grasp that. The huntsmen form a line, Garion explained, and they crash through the woods, making as much noise as they can. You take your spear and wait where the boars are likely to pass when they try to get away from the noise. Being chased makes them bad-tempered, and when they see you, they charge. That's when you spear them. Isn't that dangerous? Leldoran's eyes were wide. Garion nodded. I almost got all my ribs broken. He was not exactly boasting, but he admitted to himself that he was pleased by Leldoran's reaction to his story. Sharky's Garion, I've done it once, so I'm the expert. I mean, he's just explaining how it's done. It's all true what he's saying. I don't think he's saying he's particularly good at it. We don't have many dangerous animals in Asturia, Leldoran said, almost wistfully. A few bears, and once in a while a pack of wolves. He seemed to hesitate for a moment, looking closely at Garion. Some men, though, find more interesting things to shoot at than wild stags. He said it with a kind of secretive, sidelong glance. Oh? Garion was not quite sure what he meant. Hardly a day goes by that some Mimbrate's horse doesn't come home riderless. Garion was shocked at that. Some men think that there are too many Mimbrates in Asturia, Leldoran explained with heavy emphasis. I thought that the Erendish Civil War was over. There are many who don't believe that. There are many who believe that the war will continue until Asturia is free of the Mimbrate crown. Leldoran's tone left no question as to where he stood in the matter. Wasn't the country unified after the Battle of Vomimbre? Garion objected. Unified? How could anybody believe that? Asturia is treated like a subject province. The king's court is at Vomimbre. Every governor, every tax collector, every bailiff, every high sheriff in the kingdom is a Mimbrate. There's not a single Asturian in a position of authority anywhere in Erendia. The Mimbrates even refuse to recognize our titles. My father, whose line extends back 1,000 years, is called landowner. A Mimbrate would sooner bite out his tongue than call him baron. Leldoran's face had gone white with suppressed indignation. I didn't know that, Garion said carefully, not sure how to handle the young man's feelings. Asturia's humiliation is almost at an end, however, Leldoran declared fervently. There are some men in Asturia for whom patriotism is not dead, and the time is not far off when these men will hunt royal game. He emphasized his statement by snapping an arrow at a distant tree. That confirmed the worst of Garion's fears. Leldoran was a bit too familiar with the details not to be involved in this plot. As if he had realized himself that he had gone too far, Leldoran stared at Garion with consternation. "I'm a fool," he blurted with a guilty look around him. "I've never learned to control my tongue. Please, forget what I just said, Garion. I know you're my friend, and I know you won't betray what I said in a moment of heat." That was the one thing Garion had feared. With that single statement, Leldoran had effectively sealed his lips. He knew that Mr. Wolf should be warned that some wild scheme was afoot. The Sharkies say, "That's what I was thinking. Are we supposed to like this guy? We barely know this guy. Don't worry about it yet." He knew that Mr. Wolf should be warned that some wild scheme was afoot, but Leldoran's declaration of friendship and trust had made it impossible for him to speak. He wanted to grind his teeth with frustration as he stared full in the face of a major moral dilemma. They walked on, neither of them speaking and both a little embarrassed, until they reached the bit of wall where Garion had waited in ambush the day before. For a time they stared out into the fog, their strained silence growing more uncomfortable by the moment. "What's it like in Sandaria?" Leldoran asked suddenly. "I've never been there." "There aren't so many trees," Garion answered, looking over the wall at the dark trunks marching off in the fog. "It's an orderly kind of place." "Where did you live there?" "At Faldor's farm. It's near Lake Erat." "Is this Faldor a nobleman?" "Faldor?" Garion laughed. "No, Faldor's as common as old shoes. He's just a farmer. Decent, honest, good-hearted. I miss him." "A commoner, then," Leldoran said, seeming ready to dismiss Faldor as a man of no consequence. "Rank doesn't mean very much in Sandaria," Garion told him rather pointedly. "What a man does is more important than what he is." He made a wry face. "I was a scullery boy. It's not very pleasant, but somebody's got to do it, I suppose." "Not a serf, certainly!" Leldoran sounded shocked. "There aren't any serfs in Sandaria." "No serfs?" The young errand stared at him uncomprehendingly. "No," Garion said firmly. "We've never found it necessary to have serfs." Leldoran's expression clearly showed that he was baffled by the notion. Garion remembered the voices that had come to him out of the fog the day before, but he resisted the urge to say something about serfdom. Leldoran would never understand, and the two of them were very close to friendship. Garion felt that he needed a friend just now, and he didn't want to spoil things by saying something that would offend this likable young man. "What sort of work does your father do?" Leldoran asked politely. "He's dead. So's my mother." Garion found that if he said it quickly, it didn't hurt so much. Leldoran's eyes filled in sudden, impulsive sympathy. He put his hand consolingly on Garion's shoulder. "I'm sorry," he said, his voice almost breaking. "It must have been a terrible loss." "I was a baby," Garion shrugged, trying to sound offhand about it. "I don't even remember them." It was still too personal to talk about. "Some pestilence?" Leldoran asked gently. "No," Garion answered in the same flat tone. "They were murdered." Leldoran gasped, and his eyes went wide. A man crept into their village at night and set fire to their house, Garion continued unemotionally. My grandfather tried to catch him, but he got away. From what I understand, the man is a very old enemy of my family. Surely you're not going to let it stand like that, Leldoran demanded. No, Garion replied, still looking out into the fog. Let's see. Parmo says he seems very naive. Parmo says, I have known you for an hour or so, but we are already close enough friends that I will let you in on my country's dissension plans. And the Sharkies say, isn't that how the Upper Canada Rebellion ended before it really began? Parmo says he's very earnest and not unkind, but Leldoran has the political savvy of a banana slug and the tact of a thrown brick. Wow. Leldoran's getting some flack in the chat. He is not, at this point, presented very well. No, Garion replied, still looking out into the fog. As soon as I'm old enough, I'm going to find him and kill him. Good lad! Leldoran exclaimed, suddenly catching Garion in a rough embrace. We'll find him and cut him to pieces. We? I'll be going with you, of course, Leldoran declared. No true friend could do any less. He was obviously speaking on impulse, but just as obviously he was totally sincere. He gripped Garion's hand firmly. I swear to you, Garion, I won't rest until the murderer of your parents lies dead at your feet. The sudden declaration was so totally predictable that Garion silently berated himself for not keeping his mouth shut. His feelings in the matter were very personal, and he was not really sure he wanted company in his search for his faceless enemy. Another part of his mind, however, rejoiced in Leldoran's impulsive but unquestioning support. He decided to let the subject drop. He knew Leldoran well enough by now to realize that the young man undoubtedly made a dozen devout promises a day, quickly offered in absolute sincerity, and just as quickly forgotten. They talked then of other things, standing close together beside the shattered wall with their dark cloaks drawn tightly about them. Shortly before noon, Garion heard the muffled sound of horses' hooves somewhere out in the forest. A few minutes later, Hetar materialized out of the fog with a dozen wild-looking horses trailing after him. The tall Algar wore a short, fleece-lined leather cape. His boots were mud-spattered, and his clothes travel-stained, but otherwise he seemed unaffected by his 2 weeks in the saddle. Garion, he said gravely by way of greeting, and Garion and Leldoran stepped out to meet him. We've been waiting for you, Garion told him, and introduced Leldoran. We'll show you where the others are. Hetar nodded and followed the 2 young men through the ruins to the tower where Mr. Wolf and the others were waiting. Snow in the mountains, the Algar remarked laconically. Laconically? Laconically? I don't know how that one's pronounced. By way of explanation, as he swung down from his horse, it delayed me a bit. He pulled his hood back from his shaved head and shook out his long black scalp lock.
No harm's been done, Mr. Wolf replied. Come inside to the fire and have something to eat. We've got a lot to talk about.
Hetar looked at the horses, his tan, weathered face growing strangely blank, as if he were concentrating. The horses all looked back at him, their eyes alert and their ears pointed sharply forward. Then they turned and picked their way off among the trees. Won't they stray? Dernick wanted to know. No, Hatar answered. I asked them not to. Dernick looked puzzled, but he let it pass. The Sharkies say, slow motion hair toss, romance novel style. Of course, my hair barely even moved when I did that. Need to actually put a little force, and even then it just bounces back to where it was. They all went into the tower and sat near the fireplace. Aunt Pole cut dark bread and pale yellow cheese for them, while Dernick put more wood on the fire. Chohag sent word to the clan chiefs, Hatar reported, pulling off his cape. He wore a black, long-sleeved, horsehide jacket with steel discs riveted to it to form a kind of flexible armor. They're gathering at the stronghold for council. He unbelted the curved saber he wore, laid it to one side, and sat near the fire to eat. Wolf nodded.
Is anyone trying to get through to Prolgu?
I sent a troop of my own men to the Gorem before I left, Hatar responded. They'll get through if anyone can.
I hope so, Wolf stated. The Gorem's an old friend of mine, and I'll need his help before all this is finished.
Farmos says, I feel like the long-haired romantic hero, La Fabio, has gone out of style in recent years. Sharky say Hatar doesn't know that. I mean, to be fair, he's got a shaved head with just the, early Zuko scalp lock going on. I don't know if that is quite the same thing as Fabio, or works that well for the hair toss. You toss that around, it might come and smack you in the face. Farmo says, pony tail. Excuse me. Aren't your people afraid of the land of the Ulgos? Leldoran inquired politely. I've heard that there are monsters there that feed on the flesh of men. Hatar shrugged. They stay in their lairs in the winter-time. Besides, they're seldom brave enough to attack a full troop of mounted men. He looked over at Mr. Wolf. Southern Sendaria's crawling with Murgos. Or did you know that?
I could have guessed, Wolf replied. Did they seem to be looking for anything in particular?
I don't talk with Murgos, Hatar said shortly. His hooked nose and fierce eyes made him look at that moment like a hawk about to swoop down to the kill. I'm surprised you weren't delayed even more, Silk bantered. The whole world knows how you feel about Murgos. I indulged myself once, Hatar admitted. I met 2 of them alone on the highway. It didn't take very long.
2 less to worry about, then,
Barak grunted with approval.
I think it's time for some plain talk,
Mr. Wolf said, brushing crumbs off the front of his tunic.
Most of you have some notion of what we're doing, but I don't want anybody blundering into something by accident. We're after a man named Zedar. He used to be one of my master's disciples. Then he went over to Torak. Early last fall, he somehow slipped into the throne room at Riva and stole the Orb of Aldur. We're going to chase him down and get it back.
Farmos says, gasp, he said the name. And the Sharky say Belgarath is talking like the start of a heist. Yep, I can hear that.
Isn't he a sorcerer too?
Barak asked, tugging absently at a thick red braid.
That's not the term we use, Wolf replied. But yes, he does have a certain amount of that kind of power. We all did. Me, Beltira and Belkira, Belzadar, all the rest of us. That's one of the things I wanted to warn you about.
You all seem to have the same sort of names, Silk noticed.
Our master changed our names when he took us as disciples. It was a simple change, but it meant a great deal to us.
Wouldn't that mean that your original name was Garath? Silk asked, his ferret eyes narrowing shrewdly. Mr. Wolf looked startled, and then laughed.
I haven't heard that name for thousands of years. I've been Belgarath for so long that I'd almost completely forgotten Garath. It's probably just as well. Garath was a troublesome boy. A thief and a liar, among other things.
Some things never change, Aunt Pole observed.
Nobody's perfect,
Wolf admitted blandly. Why did Zedar steal the orb? Hetar asked, setting aside his plate.
He's always wanted it for himself, the old man replied. That could be it, but more likely he's trying to take it to Torak. The one who delivers the orb to One Eye is going to be his favorite.
But Torak's dead, Leldoran objected. The Revan warder killed him at Vomimbre.
No,
Wolf said.
Torak isn't dead, only asleep. Brand's sword wasn't the one destined to kill him. Zedar carried him off after the battle and hid him somewhere. Someday he'll awaken. Probably someday fairly soon, if I'm reading the signs right. We've got to get the orb back before that happens.
Pharma says Belgarath's 11. Sharky say, as it goes on, it even sounds more and more like that.
This Zedar's caused a lot of trouble,
Barak rumbled.
You should have dealt with him a long time ago. Possibly,
Wolf admitted.
Why don't you just wave your hand and make him disappear?
Barak suggested, making a sort of gesture with his thick fingers. Wolf shook his head.
I can't. Not even the gods can do that.
We've got some big problems then, Silk said with a frown. Every Murgo from here to Rakgoska is going to try to stop us from catching Zedar.
Not necessarily,
Wolf disagreed.
Zedar's got the orb, but Kthulchik commands the Grolims.
Kthulchik? Leldoran asked. We're getting a lot of names right now.
The Grolim High Priest. He and Zedar hate each other. I think we can count on him to try to keep Zedar from getting to Torak with the orb.
Barak shrugged.
What difference does it make? You and Belgarath can use magic if we run into anything difficult, can't you? There are limitations on that sort of thing,
Wolf said a bit evasively.
I don't understand,
Barak said, frowning. Y'all ready to hear about magic? Mr. Wolf took a deep breath.
All right, as long as it's come up, let's go into that too. Sorcery, if that's what you want to call it, is a disruption of the natural order of things. Sometimes it has certain unexpected effects, so you have to be very careful about what you do with it. Not only that, it makes...
He frowned.
Let's call it a sort of noise. That's not exactly what it is, but it serves well enough to explain. Others with the same abilities can hear that noise. Once Polgara and I start changing things, every Grolem in the West is going to know exactly where we are and what we are doing. They'll keep piling things in front of us until we're exhausted.
It takes almost as much energy to do things that way as it does to do them with your arms and back, Aunt Pole explained. It's very tiring. She sat beside the fire, carefully mending a small tear in one of Garion's tunics.
I didn't know that,
Barak admitted. Not many people do.
If we have to, Pole and I can take certain steps,
Wolf went on.
But we can't keep it up forever, and we can't simply make things vanish. I'm sure you can see why.
Oh, of course, Silk professed, though his tone indicated that he did not. Everything that exists depends on everything else, Aunt Pole explained quietly. If you were to unmake one thing, it's altogether possible that everything would just vanish. The fire popped, and Garion jumped slightly. The vaulted chamber seemed suddenly dark, and shadows lurked in the corners.
That can't happen, of course, Wolf told them. When you try to unmake something, your will simply recoils on you. If you say, "Be not," then you are the one who vanishes. That's why we are very careful about what we say.
I can understand why, Silk said, his eyes widening slightly.
Most of the things we'll encounter can be dealt with by ordinary means, Wolf continued. That's the reason we've brought you together. At least, that's one of the reasons. Among you, you'll be able to handle most of the things that get in our way. The important thing to remember is that Polgara and I have to get to Zadar before he can reach Torak with the orb. Zadar's found some way to touch the orb. I don't know how. If he can show Torak how it's done, no power on earth will be able to stop One Eye from becoming king and god over the whole world.
They all sat in the ruddy, flickering light of the fire, their faces serious as they considered that possibility.
I think that pretty well covers everything, don't you, Pole?
I believe so, Father, she replied, smoothing the front of her gray, homespun gown. Later, outside the tower, as gray evening crept in among the foggy ruins of Voasun, and the smell of the thick stew Aunt Pole was cooking for supper drifted out to them, Garion turned to Silk. Is it all really true? He asked. The small man looked out into the fog. Let's act as if we believed that it is, he suggested. Under the circumstances, I think it would be a bad idea to make a mistake. Are you afraid too, Silk? Garion asked. Silk sighed. Yes, he admitted, but we can behave as if we believed that we aren't, can't we? I guess we can try, Garion said, and the two of them turned to go back into the chamber at the foot of the tower, where the firelight danced on the low stone arches, holding the fog and chill at bay. And that's the end of Chapter 2. Chapter 3 starts on page 32. Oh no. Wow. Alright, I missed some chat here. Let's see. Sharky say they were so resistant to saying the names earlier in case magical peeps were listening. Why are they okay with it now? Is the magic like satellites and need to be pointed in the right direction? And then Farmos replies they were going to get storytellers to say his name a bunch so that they could say it without him being able to tell where they were, since his name is in that story we heard at the beginning. And then, yeah, once I typed it, Mr. Sharky said about as much. Yeah. So that's all answered. Everybody understands? Sharky say Mr. just made a strained honking noise. Let's call it a sort of noise. Honk! And then Farmo says, oh dear, now I'm having to restrain myself from making a strained kind of honking noise. Then Farmo says, I do appreciate that most of the party is as uninformed as the rest of us about how magic works. It's not just, we have to explain the magic to Gary and he doesn't know anything. Yeah, this is really, like, we got a little bit of explanation about the idea of the will and the word at the end of Pawn of Prophecy, and then this is probably the most detail we've gotten since then. And even then, they haven't said very much. They have not gone into, like, any details about what is possible. They've pretty much just explained that unmaking something is not possible. You can't pick up a rock and say stop existing and have that rock stop existing. Instead, you'll just die if you try that. But you might be able to pick up a rock and say turn into coal, maybe. Yeah. And then we got Farmo says Zedar perks his head up. Belgarath. Off in the distance, drifting over the hills, we hear Honk! No. We did get a bunch of other names. It's interesting that Belgarath referred to Zedar once as Belzedar, but then we also have Beltira and Belkira. So a few bells coming up in that part, as well as Zedar, who we have also heard referred to as the apostate. Excuse me. No. Leldorin. I'm enunciating so clearly. Come on. Oh, boy. So, yeah. We did have Leldorin introduced. And it sounds like people don't like him very much. And I don't blame you at all. We'll see. We'll see. There has been some character development with other characters in this book. Maybe there'll be character development with him. I say this book, but I mean this series so far. Yeah. So, they're starting off this book with a little exposition. We've got 2 new members of the party within the first few chapters, as well as a big sort of info dump about, okay, here it is. You may have guessed that it was the orb that was gone missing, but Zedar is the one that stole it, and here's why, and what we're going to try and do about it. So, definitely more of an explanation for a few things than we got during Pawn of Prophecy. Sometimes I forget to enunciate, and it is a victory. Wow. Oh boy. Yep. So what's the next chapter about? Well, I guess we'll find out in 2 days. Irma says Chibi Doran. I almost forgot that I'm trying to think. I've got to reset my sleep again because it's all messed up. I can't fall asleep until like after 6 a.m. So I need to have a day where I just stay up all night and then all day and then fall asleep, at like 9 p.m. or something like that and try and get things back to normal. And I was thinking, okay, well, I couldn't do it last night because I've got the stream tonight and I don't want to be completely dead for the stream. I can't do it tonight because tomorrow I've got my first class back at Kung Fu. It was supposed to be last week, but some problems happened and it didn't work out. But I will be going back to Kung Fu tomorrow. So I want to make sure I'm rested for that. And so I was like, okay, I'll do it after that. But now I'm like, oh yeah, there's also the stream on Friday. So if I stay up all night tomorrow, then I'm going to be exhausted for the stream on Friday. So I don't know, maybe I'll have to wait until Friday night, stay up all night Friday, and stay up all day Saturday, and then sleep Saturday night. Sharky say, Lel Doran seems pretty excited about murdering people, or at least having a reason to murder people. Farmos thinks he's one of those people who equates battle with glory. They're called errands. As we meet more errands that aren't serfs, you will find that it is not an uncommon attitude. Farmos says like he has probably been fed a lot of stories about people in glorious battles fighting against capital O oppression. Yeah, the errands like they're fighting. Like they like fighting each other. The Membrates and the Asturians got beef. Oh. But yeah, like, hey, I've met this guy for an hour and he's telling me that they might be going to hunt royals. That's no good. Farmo says whether or not he's actually been in any battles with actual people who want to kill him. Yeah, we'll learn more about Leldoran as it goes. But yeah, I mean, I guess the thing to remember about him is how emotional he is. I think that's a big part of the character is, and I'll try to get that across in the voice. I started to try and do that as it goes on, and that's I think how I'm going to remember Leldoran's voice is it's similar to Garion's because they're both pretty young, but it's just full of emotion. Like everything is shiny and new and exciting. Farmo says, goes into everything whole hog head first. Unlike Garion, who has whole hogs go into him head first. Right? Get it? Sharky say, ha! Come on, it was pretty good. He fought a pig. Hank. That's going to be the sound. What is that, magic? That's going to be the sound magic makes now. Every time somebody does something magic, you're going to know that there's a silent Hank echoing through their mind. Oh, no. All right. Well, it's 8:40. This is turned into a little bit of a longer stream because we ended up reading the 2 chapters. Aldur was a very naughty goose. Okay. It's time to go. Have a good night, everybody. Happy Wednesday. I'll see you all on Friday. I hope everything's good in between now and then. Untitled Goose Game has a whole new dimension now. We saw a 3D print. It was basically just a 3D print of the goose. And I guess, you could just easily print the body in like white filament and the feet and beak in orange filament. But it had a spot for, like, they put a magnet in the bottom of the beak so that you could hang things from it. They showed it holding like a keychain or a knife. So Might need to make that at some point once we get our 3D printer fired up again. We've let it kind of sit for a while now, though I do have things I need to print, so that's got to be a project for sometime soon, is get that going again. Anyways, have a good night, and yeah, see you on Friday. Bye bye.